Joseph could never have predicted how God would use those hardships, but God had already factored them into his plan. The very problems that seemed like detours were actually the direct path to his destiny. The same is true for us. That job loss, that betrayal, that illness, that closed door, it may feel like a mistake, but God knew it was coming. He is not wringing his hands wondering what to do now. He is still in control, still guiding, still working all things together for good. Our limited perspective makes us think problems are roadblocks, but God sees them as opportunities to reveal his power and draw us closer to him. When you believe that your problems don't surprise God, it changes the way you respond to them. Instead of fear, you find faith. Instead of despair, you find hope. You realize that if God allowed it, he has a purpose for it. You can face life's struggles with confidence, not because you are strong enough, but because he is wise enough to use even the hardest things for your ultimate good. Nothing is wasted in his hands. Sometimes we think problems are signs of God's absence, but often they are signs of his presence. Problems push us to rely on him in ways we never would if life were easy. They strip away our illusions of control and remind us that he is the one directing our steps. If we never face challenges, we might forget our need for him. But when problems arise, we are invited to lean deeper into his strength, his wisdom, and his timing. The key is to trust that he sees the bigger picture. Just as an author knows the twists and turns of the story before the reader does, God knows every chapter of your life before you live it. What feels like chaos to you is carefully planned by him. That's why you don't have to fear the unknown. Fossil, your future may be uncertain to you, but it is not uncertain to him. He has already gone ahead of you, already arranged the details, already prepared the provision you will need, even the mistakes you've made, the times you've stumbled, the choices you regret. God knew about them before you made them. It's a king push-up. And still, he made a plan that includes grace, restoration, and a way forward. Your failures don't cancel his purpose. Your detours don't derail his plan. He is sovereign enough to take even the wrong turns and use them to lead you where you need to be. That's why you never have to live in fear that your life is beyond repair. God has already seen it all and already made provision for it all. When you really let this truth sink in, it brings a peace that no problem can shake. You stop asking, what if this ruins everything? And instead begin to say, oh, God already knew this would happen, and he has a way through it. You stop living in constant worry about tomorrow and start living in trust, knowing that the one who holds tomorrow is not surprised by anything that comes your way. Problems may catch you off guard, but they never catch him off guard. You can walk in faith because the God who created you has already written the story of your life, and no problem is big enough to erase his purpose. What looks like a setback to you can be a setup for God's greater purpose. Life often has a way of making us feel like we've been pushed backward when we expected to move forward. You might plan carefully, pray sincerely, and work diligently, and yet something happens that seems to undo all your progress. Maybe the opportunity you were hoping for slips through your fingers, the relationship you trusted falls apart, or the door you were waiting to open stays firmly shut. In those moments, it's easy to feel like you're losing ground, like your life is on pause, or even moving in the wrong direction. But what you see as a setback may actually be God's setup, positioning you exactly where you need to be for something far greater than you imagined. Setbacks have a way of humbling us. They remind us that our lives are not fully in our control. They force us to slow down, to reevaluate, and to see things from a perspective we might have ignored if everything went according to our plans. And sometimes that humility is exactly what God wants for us. He knows that we cannot step into his greater purpose if we are clinging too tightly to our own. The pause, the delay, the closed door, these are not signs of failure. They can be tools in God's hands, reshaping your direction and preparing your heart. Think about Moses. He thought he was ready to deliver his people when he killed the Egyptian and tried to take matters into his own hands. Instead, he ended up in the wilderness for 40 years tending sheep. To him, that must have felt like a setback, like he had wasted his life. But in reality, it was a setup. God was preparing him to lead millions of people through the desert by first teaching him how to lead sheep through the desert. What Moses saw as failure was actually training. The wilderness was not punishment, it was preparation. T was preparation. Your own wilderness moments may feel like wasted time, but they can be God's classroom. The disappointments that sting the most may be the very things God uses to strengthen your faith and deepen your trust in him. What looks like rejection from the world may be redirection from heaven. That job you didn't get, that dream that didn't materialize, that opportunity that slipped away. It might not have been the right thing for you, and God was protecting you even when it didn't feel like it. Setbacks also have a way of refining our motives. Sometimes we chase goals because of pride, comparison, or selfish ambition, and we don't even realize it until the door slams shut. In those moments, we're forced to examine why we wanted what we wanted. And in the process, God can purify our desires, aligning them with his will rather than our own. A closed door doesn't mean he has abandoned you. It may mean he is saving you from something that would have harmed you or distracted you from your true purpose. Another thing to remember is that God's setup often involves timing. We may think we're ready, but he knows the exact moment when all the pieces will come together. To us, a delay feels like failure, but to him, it's alignment. He is arranging circumstances, moving people, and opening opportunities that you can't yet see. From your perspective, it feels like nothing is happening. From his perspective, everything is happening at exactly the right pace. If you trust him in the delay, you will discover that what felt like wasted time was actually the season when he was preparing the stage for his purpose in your life. Think about David. Anointed as king while still a shepherd boy, he spent years on the run from Saul before he ever sat on the throne. To David, it must have felt like one setback after another. Hunted, betrayed, hiding in caves. But those years of running were shaping him into the man who could lead with courage, humility, and dependence on God. If he had gone straight from the pasture to the palace, he might not have been ready. The setbacks were setups, building his character so he could carry the weight of his calling. Your setbacks might be doing the same thing. They may be teaching you perseverance, shaping your patience, or strengthening your reliance on God. They may be developing skills in you that will be crucial for the next season of your life. They may even be placing you in situations where you'll meet the very people who will play a role in your destiny. You don't see it now, but nothing is wasted. Every delay has a purpose. Every detour has meaning. When you begin to see your setbacks through this lens, it changes how you respond to them. Instead of growing bitter, you grow expectant. Instead of giving up, you lean in. You start asking, God, what are you setting me up for? Instead of saying, God, why are you holding me back? That shift in perspective brings hope even in the hardest seasons. Because if God is the one orchestrating your steps, then every step, even the ones that feel backward, are actually moving you closer to his plan for your life. What looks like a dead end might be the very road that leads you to your breakthrough. What feels like a loss may actually be the very thing that makes room for something better. God specializes in turning setbacks into setups. He did it with Joseph when prison became the pathway to the palace. He did it with Moses when the wilderness became the preparation for leadership. He did it with David when caves became the training ground for kingship. And he can do it in your life too. God uses problems to shape your character and strengthen your faith. Most of us want an easy life free of pain and free of struggle, but growth does not happen in comfort. Character is not built on the mountaintops where everything is going our way. It is built in the valleys where we are tested, stretched, and challenged. The truth is, problems are some of God's greatest tools to refine us into the people he created us to be. They reveal what is inside us, they expose what needs to change, and they give us opportunities to develop qualities we could never gain otherwise. When everything in life is smooth, it's easy to think we're strong, patient, or kind. But when problems arise, when we are treated unfairly, when our plans collapse, when we don't get what we want, our true character shows. Problems press against us, and what comes out under pressure reveals who we really are. If anger, bitterness, or fear surface, it shows us where we need God's transforming work. And as we surrender those areas to Him, He uses the very pressure of the problem to shape us into something new. Think about a diamond. It doesn't form overnight, and it doesn't form without pressure. It takes time and immense pressure for carbon to become a diamond. In the same way, it takes time and the weight of life's struggles to form the character God desires in us. Problems may feel like they're crushing us, but in reality, they can be shaping us into something far more valuable, far more beautiful than we ever imagined. Faith itself grows strongest in the soil of difficulty. You don't need faith when everything makes sense, when life is easy, and when you can see the outcome. Faith grows when you don't understand, when you can't see the way forward, and when you have no choice but to trust God. Every problem you face is an opportunity to put your faith into practice, to move it from theory into reality. You can say you trust God, but it's in the middle of the storm that you truly learn what trust looks like. Problems become the training ground where faith grows muscles. Hell, consider the story of Job. He faced problems that most of us cannot even imagine. Loss of wealth, loss of health, loss of family. Yet in the middle of his suffering, his faith was tested and refined. At the end of his trial, his understanding of God was deeper, his relationship with Him was stronger, and his testimony was more powerful. Job discovered that problems can strip away the surface level things we depend on and leave us clinging to God alone. And in that clinging, faith becomes unshakable. The New Testament reminds us that trials produce perseverance, and perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. That sequence shows us that problems are not wasted. They are producing something within us. Every hardship endured, every challenge faced with faith, every obstacle overcome is shaping who we are becoming. It's not just about surviving the problem, it's about being transformed through it. Sometimes God uses problems to teach us patience. In a world where we want everything instantly, problems slow us down and remind us that life doesn't bend to our timeline. Waiting on God develops endurance, and endurance builds strength. Sometimes problems teach us compassion. When we go through pain, we are better able to empathize with others who are hurting. Our own struggles open our hearts to be a source of comfort and encouragement for someone else. And sometimes problems teach us humility. They remind us that we are not in control, that we cannot solve everything on our own, and that we must depend on God's wisdom and strength instead of our own. Problems can also purify our motives. When things are hard, we begin to see why we do what we do. If we serve God only when life is easy, our devotion is shallow. But if we remain faithful in trials, our love for Him is proven genuine. God doesn't allow problems to break us down aimlessly. He allows them to reveal, refine, and renew what is inside of us so that our faith becomes authentic and our character becomes more like His. Think about Peter. Before the crucifixion, he was bold in words, declaring he would never deny Jesus. But when pressure came, when fear and danger surrounded him, he denied Jesus 3 times. That problem exposed the weakness in Peter's faith. Yet Jesus didn't leave him in shame. After the resurrection, He restored Peter, and through that painful failure, Peter's faith was deepened and his character was transformed. The same man who once crumbled under pressure became the leader who preached with boldness on the day of Pentecost. The problem didn't define him, but it refined him. Every time you face a problem, you have a choice. You can let it make you bitter, or you can let it make you better. You can resist the lesson it carries, or you can lean into God and allow Him to do His work in you. If you let Him, He will take the very things meant to harm you and use them to grow you. He will use the weight of your problems to build strength, the heat of your trials to purify your heart, and the storms of life to anchor your faith more deeply in Him. The cross looked like defeat, but it became the greatest victory. To those who were there on that dark day, watching Jesus nailed to the cross, it seemed like the end of hope. His disciples had left everything to follow Him, believing He was the Messiah who would bring freedom, justice, and a new kingdom. But as he hung there, beaten and humiliated, it must have looked like all their faith had been misplaced. The one they thought would save them now appeared powerless, mocked by crowds and pierced by nails. From a human perspective, it was the ultimate picture of defeat. But what no one realized in that moment was that the cross was not the end. It was the beginning of salvation for all mankind. What looked like the greatest loss was, in fact, the foundation of the greatest victory. That is how God works. He often hides his greatest triumphs behind the mask of defeat. What appears hopeless in the natural is bursting with power in the spiritual. The disciples could not see it at the time, but the very moment that looked like failure was the moment God was fulfilling his ultimate purpose. The enemy thought he had won. The religious leaders thought they had silenced Jesus forever. The crowd thought they had witnessed his downfall. But in reality, they were witnessing the greatest act of love and redemption the world had ever seen. The cross reminds us that God's ways are higher than our ways. His plan doesn't always align with human expectations. We look for strength and power, but God reveals strength in surrender. We expect victory to come through force, but God brings victory through sacrifice. What looks to us like weakness is often the very place where his glory shines the brightest. The cross demonstrates that God can take the darkest moment in history and turn it into the brightest light of hope. This truth is not just about what happened 2,000 years ago. It is also about your life today. There are times when your situation feels like a cross, when it looks like everything is falling apart, when it seems like the enemy has won. Maybe it's a broken relationship, a financial collapse, a diagnosis you never expected, or a dream that seems to have died. From your perspective, it looks like defeat. But the cross teaches us that appearances can be deceiving. What feels like the end may be the very thing God uses to bring resurrection and new life. Think about the disciples hiding in fear after Jesus' crucifixion. To them, it was over. Everything they had lived for seemed crushed. Yet 3 days later, the stone was rolled away and the tomb was empty. What they thought was the greatest loss became the foundation of their boldness, their hope, and their mission to change the world. Without the cross, there could be no resurrection. Without death, there could be no victory over the grave. What they saw as defeat was the very path to eternal triumph. In your own struggles, the same principle applies. What looks like a dead end may actually be the doorway to a new beginning. What feels like God's absence may actually be where he is doing his greatest work. The cross teaches us that we cannot measure victory by what we see in the moment. Sometimes God allows us to walk through seasons that don't make sense, seasons that look like losses, but those very seasons are laying the groundwork for breakthroughs we could never imagine. When you understand this, your perspective on problems changes. You stop assuming that hardship means failure, and you start looking for the hidden purpose. You stop seeing defeat as final, and you start trusting that God can bring victory out of it. The cross reminds us that the worst thing that could happen became the best thing that ever happened. If God can turn crucifixion into salvation, he can turn your darkest day into a stepping stone toward destiny. The cross also shows us that victory often comes through surrender. Jesus could have called down angels to rescue him, but he chose to endure the cross. He appeared to lose, but in that surrender, he won the ultimate battle. In the same way, we often fight to control everything in our lives, but it is in surrendering to God that we experience true victory. Letting go of our pride, our need for control, our own plans may feel like defeat, but it is the very act that allows God to do his greatest work in us. History has proven that the message of the cross has power to transform lives across every culture and generation. What once looked like shame has become the symbol of hope, forgiveness, and eternal life. The Roman cross was meant to be a tool of humiliation and death, but God transformed it into the ultimate emblem of victory and grace. That is what he does. He takes what the world means for evil and turns it into good. So when life brings you to a place where everything feels lost, remember the cross. When you are tempted to believe that your story is over, remember that 3 days later, the stone rolled away. When it seems like the enemy has won, remember that God's victory is never defeated by appearances. The cross looked like defeat, but it became the greatest victory. God's purpose will outlast your pain and turn trials into triumphs. Pain can feel so permanent when you're in the middle of it. The nights seem longer, the days feel heavier, and every step forward feels like it takes every ounce of strength you have left. In those moments, it is easy to believe that what you are feeling now will define your future forever. But pain, as real as it is always temporary. God's purpose is eternal. What you see as unbearable today may be the very experience God uses to birth something extraordinary tomorrow. When you look at the people God used throughout history, you will notice that pain was almost always part of their story. Joseph endured betrayal by his brothers and years of injustice before he stepped into the palace. Hannah endured the pain of barrenness before she became the mother of Samuel. Paul endured imprisonment, beatings, and rejection, yet his letters written in chains have encouraged millions for centuries. Their pain was real, but it was not wasted. God turned it into triumph that still impacts lives today. Pain tests your endurance. It strips away shallow faith and calls you into a deeper trust. When you are walking through seasons of struggle, you may not understand why God allows it, but you can know that He never allows pain without attaching purpose to it. Even in silence, He is working behind the scenes, shaping your story into something that will one day bring glory to Him and strength to you. Trials also have a way of shifting your perspective. When everything is easy, you may take blessings for granted. But when you walk through hardship, your gratitude deepens, your appreciation for small victories grows, and your compassion for others multiplies. God uses pain to stretch your heart so that you can love more deeply, give more freely, and understand others more genuinely. The scars you carry from trials can become the very marks that make you relatable, approachable, and impactful to others who are hurting. One of the greatest truths about pain is that it never has the final say. Death itself, which appears to be the ultimate defeat, was conquered at the resurrection. If God can turn death into life, He can turn your pain into purpose. That sickness that shook your body, that failure that embarrassed you, that loss that broke your heart, all of it can be transformed in His hands. The very things that were meant to crush you can be the things that launch you into new levels of strength and faith. Sometimes the trial you are facing feels unbearable because you can't see the other side. You only see the weight you're carrying now, but God sees the outcome. He knows how He will bring beauty from ashes. He knows how He will use what was meant for evil to bring about good. What you are enduring today could be the very testimony that will one day encourage someone else not to give up. The trial you despise today may be the triumph you celebrate tomorrow. Think about an athlete who trains with heavy weights. The training is painful, the muscles ache, and the effort feels exhausting. But that pain is not meaningless. It is building strength for the victory ahead. In the same way, the struggles you face are not without purpose. They are preparing you for the calling God has placed on your life. Without the training of pain, you would not have the endurance to walk in triumph. Without the trials, you would not have the strength to carry the blessing. God's purpose is bigger than the temporary pain. Your heartache, your loss, your struggles, they are all chapters in a much bigger story. And when you trust Him with those chapters, He has a way of weaving them together into something that not only blesses your life, but also impacts the lives of others. What seems unbearable now will one day be a story of His faithfulness. What seems like the end will become a testimony of His victory. So do not let pain make you believe that God has abandoned you. Do not let trials convince you that life has no meaning. Remember that His purpose always goes beyond what you feel in the moment. The same God who turned a cross into salvation, who turned mourning into dancing, who turned weakness into strength, is the God who can take your pain and turn it into triumph. Hold on to hope because your pain is temporary, but God's purpose is eternal. The night may be long, but morning always comes. What you carry today will not break you, it will build you. And when you come out of this season, you will see that every tear, every struggle, and every trial was used by God to lead you into victory. That is why you can face pain with courage, because His purpose will outlast it. His grace will sustain you through it, and His triumph will be your story in the end.